In the autumn of 1857, something happened in Little Rock, Arkansas, something the local authorities buried so deep it took more than a century for whispers to surface. On Thanksgiving night, in what was once the grandest plantation house in Pulaski County, a slave named Samson supposedly killed his master with his bare hands, snapping Colonel Jeremiah Ruddle's neck like a dry twig. But here's what makes this story different from other tales of rebellion. Witnesses claimed Samson's strength that night was inhuman, strong enough to crush a man's skull with one hand, bend iron tools into pretzel shapes, and leave handprints pressed so deep into the oak beams they're still visible today. The official records were sealed, the witnesses silenced, and every trace of the event scrubbed from local newspapers. So, what really happened on Rutledge Plantation that Thanksgiving night? And why did three separate county officials spend the rest of their lives insisting that what they saw defied all natural explanation? Before we continue with the story of Samson and the secrets buried beneath Rutledge Plantation, if you're fascinated by these forgotten chapters of American history, hit that subscribe button and tell us in the comments what state you're listening from, because tonight's tale might be closer to your hometown than you think. Our story begins in the heart of Arkansas Territory, 20 miles south of Little Rock, where the Arkansas River carved its lazy path through some of the richest bottomland cotton country in the South. By 1857, Rutledge Plantation had grown to more than 3,000 acres, worked by nearly 200 enslaved souls who lived in the shadow of Colonel Jeremiah Ruddle's imposing Greek Revival mansion. Rutledge himself was a man of contradictions, a Massachusetts-born lawyer who had moved south in his 20s, drawn by the promise of easy wealth through cotton speculation. Unlike many planters who inherited their estates, Rutledge had chosen this life, and maybe because of that choice, he ruled with a methodical cruelty that shocked even his neighbors. He kept meticulous records of punishments, maintained breeding charts for his human property, and was known throughout Pulaski County for his so-called scientific approach to slave management. The enslaved community at Rutledge Plantation lived in two distinct quarters: the field hands in rough-hewn cabins near the river, and the house servants in slightly better lodgings closer to the mansion. It was a world of whispered conversations, hidden knowledge, and survival strategies passed down through generations. The older slaves spoke of better times under Ruddle's predecessor, a gentler man who'd sold out when the colonel arrived with northern money and southern ambition. Among this community, Samson stood apart, not because of his size, though at 6'4" he towered over most men of his time, but because of his strange history. Rutledge had purchased him 3 years earlier from a bankrupt plantation in Louisiana. The bill of sale included unusual details: strong constitution, unusual physical capabilities, possible medical anomaly. Buyer assumes all risk. The seller, a Frenchman named Boudreau, had been eager to part with Samson despite his obvious value as a field hand. Samson never spoke of his past, but others noticed things. He could work 16-hour days in the fields without showing fatigue. He could lift cotton bales that normally required 2 men. His hands, when examined closely, were calloused so thick they looked almost like horn. The plantation blacksmith, an enslaved man named Jupiter, swore that Samson could bend horseshoes with his bare hands. But Samson was careful never to display such strength where the overseer might see. Yet it wasn't just his physical power that set him apart. There was an intelligence in his eyes, a hidden literacy, suggesting an education far beyond what any slave was allowed. Late at night, some claimed to see him scratching symbols into the dirt outside his cabin. Not English letters, but something else. Something that looked almost like formulas. Colonel Rutledge took a special interest in Samson, though not out of kindness. He'd heard the rumors about the slave's abilities and saw an opportunity for both profit and scientific study. Rutledge fancied himself a man of learning, a subscriber to phrenology journals and agricultural periodicals obsessed with human variation. He began conducting what he called strength assessments on Samson, timing his work, measuring his output, and documenting his results in leather-bound journals kept locked in his study. These sessions took place in the old carriage house, far from prying eyes. Rutledge would have Samson lift increasingly heavy objects, anvils, tree trunks, even sections of iron machinery, while he took notes and made calculations. The colonel was particularly fascinated by Samson's apparent ability to work without rest, often pushing him long past the point where any normal man would collapse. By the autumn of 1857, these assessments had turned darker. Rutledge had begun inviting guests to witness what he called his demonstrations, wealthy planters from neighboring counties who came to see the slave who could perform feats of impossible strength. Some demonstrations were lifting contests. Others involved Samson bending iron bars or breaking thick wooden planks with his bare hands. But as Thanksgiving approached, something began to change in Samson's demeanor. Other slaves noticed at first a tension in his movements, a faraway look in his eyes, as if he were calculating something. Jupiter, the blacksmith, later told investigators that Samson had started asking strange questions about the plantation's layout, about the colonel's habits, about which servants had access to different parts of the mansion. The Rutledge household was preparing for what the colonel planned to be his grandest Thanksgiving celebration yet. Over 40 guests had been invited, some from as far away as Memphis and New Orleans, including several who'd specifically come to see his remarkable specimen. The menu had been planned for weeks, with delicacies ordered from as far as Baltimore. And most importantly, Colonel Rutledge had arranged a special after-dinner demonstration featuring Samson, one he promised would astound his guests and cement his reputation as Arkansas's most forward-thinking plantation owner. What Rutledge didn't know was that Samson had other plans. The house servants had been listening, moving silently through the mansion as they prepared for the celebration. They overheard conversations about the planned demonstration. Even more disturbing, some had caught glimpses of Colonel Ruddle's private journals, left carelessly open in his study. What they saw inside chilled them. Entries that spoke of terminal experiments, ultimate strength limitations, and acceptable losses in the name of scientific advancement. As Thanksgiving Day, 1857, dawned crisp and clear over the Arkansas bottomlands, both Colonel Rutledge and Samson were making their final preparations. Neither man knew that before the night was over, one of them would be dead and the other would vanish into the Arkansas wilderness, leaving behind questions that would haunt Pulaski County for generations. November 26, 1857, began like any other Thanksgiving on Rutledge Plantation. But beneath the surface, tension rippled, faint but unmistakable for those who knew where to look. By dawn, the mansion's kitchen was alive with frantic energy. House slaves moved quickly under the watchful eye of Molly Kittenden, the head cook, preparing a feast that would seat 50 guests in the grand dining room. Samson had been assigned to prepare the grounds, setting up extra seating on the mansion's wraparound veranda and ensuring that the oil lamps were filled and positioned for the evening's entertainment. But those who worked alongside him noticed something different, a precision in his movements, an economy of effort, as if he were saving his strength for something deliberate. His usual eagerness to take on the heaviest tasks was replaced by quiet calculation, every motion measured, every glance purposeful. Meanwhile, Colonel Rutledge spent the morning in his study, reviewing notes and preparing for what he privately called the grand demonstration. His journals from that day, later discovered during the mansion's demolition, revealed his growing excitement. He believed this evening would provide the ultimate proof of his theories on human physical limits. The final entry in his careful script read, "Today I shall push the specimen beyond all previous thresholds. Science demands nothing less than complete understanding." The guests began arriving around noon, their carriages rolling one after another down the plantation's oak-lined drive. Among them were some of the most notable names in Arkansas society: Judge Cornelius Dillingham of Little Rock, Samuel Vaughn, a wealthy planter from Helena, and Dr. Nathaniel Petton, a Memphis physician known for his controversial writings on racial physiology. But the guest who drew the most attention was Professor Emanuel Voss, a German scholar claiming expertise in what he called physical anthropology. He had traveled all the way from St. Louis to witness Ruddle's remarkable slave. As the afternoon wore on and the guests enjoyed their pre-dinner drinks on the veranda, Samson continued his tasks with the methodical focus of a man following a carefully rehearsed plan. Jupiter, the blacksmith, later told investigators that when he tried to speak with Samson around 3 o'clock, the larger man looked at him with eyes that seemed to see right through him, as though his mind was somewhere far away. Dinner passed without incident. The guests feasted on roasted turkey, sugar-cured ham, cornbread stuffing, and an array of vegetables, all prepared by the invisible hands of the enslaved. Laughter filled the air. The talk turned into cotton prices, politics, and the growing divide between North and South, a divide that would erupt into war just 4 years later. But as the evening drew toward its climax, Colonel Rutledge rose to address his guests, his face flushed with wine and pride. "Gentlemen," he declared, his voice ringing above the murmurs of conversation, "tonight, you will witness something that challenges everything we believe about the limits of human capability. My specimen, Samson, will perform feats once thought impossible." The guests followed Rutledge outside, their chatter a mix of excitement and skepticism, until they reached the old carriage house. Torches lined the building perimeter, their flickering light casting long, shifting shadows across the weathered walls. Inside, the space had been cleared, replaced with an eerie array of testing equipment. Iron bars of varying thickness, massive wooden beams, and several sections of railroad iron resting on heavy blocks. Samson was already there, his towering frame silhouetted against the torchlight. But there was something about his posture, the set of his shoulders, the tilt of his head. It wasn't just readiness, it was purpose. Dr. Peton, the Memphis physician, later wrote in his private diary that looking at Samson that night was like staring at a spring wound to its breaking point, all controlled energy, waiting for release. Colonel Rutledge began with the usual demonstrations. Samson lifted weights that should have been impossible, bent iron bars that would have required machinery, and split oak beams with his bare hands while the crowd gasped in disbelief. Professor Voss scribbled notes furiously, muttering in German, occasionally asking Rutledge to repeat certain tests. But as the night went on, Rutledge's demands became darker. He ordered Samson to lift heavier loads, bend thicker iron, break denser wood. The guests, at first amazed, began to shift uncomfortably. The thrill of spectacle was giving way to the realization that they were watching something far more disturbing: systematic torture disguised as science. It was Judge Dillingham who first noticed a change in Samson's eyes. Around 10:30, as Rutledge ordered him to attempt lifting a section of railroad rail, something inside the man seemed to snap. The quiet obedience was gone, replaced by a cold intensity that made the judge instinctively step back. "Colonel," Dillingham murmured, "perhaps we've seen enough for one evening." But Rutledge, drunk on both wine and ambition, waved the warning aside. "Nonsense," he barked. "We're just reaching the truly interesting thresholds. Samson, I want you to attempt something we've never tried before." He gestured toward a massive piece of machinery that had been brought in earlier that day, the iron flywheel from a cotton gin, weighing easily 400 pounds. For a long moment, Samson just stared, first at the flywheel, then at Colonel Rutledge, and finally at the ring of expectant faces surrounding them. When he spoke, his voice was so quiet that several guests had to lean forward to hear him. "No, sir." The simple refusal struck the gathering like a physical blow. In the antebellum South, a slave's direct defiance of a master's order was unthinkable, a transgression so grave it demanded instant and brutal punishment. But there was something in Samson's tone and in the way he stood that made everyone hesitate. Colonel Rutledge's face shifted through a range of emotions: surprise, confusion, anger, and finally settled into a cold, seething fury none of his guests had ever seen before. "What did you say?" Samson didn't flinch. "I said no, sir." His voice was still calm, but beneath it was something new, something that made Professor Voss stop writing mid-sentence, and Judge Dillingham take another step backward. "You will do as I command," Rutledge snarled, his voice trembling with rage, "or you'll face consequences that will make our previous session seem like kindness." For a moment that felt like eternity, The two men faced each other across the torchlit room. Then Samson smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that several witnesses later described as the most terrifying expression they had ever seen. "No, sir," he said again. "I don't believe I will." What happened next unfolded with a speed that left most witnesses unable to process what they'd seen. Samson moved toward Colonel Rutledge with the grace of a man half his size, crossing the space between them in 3 impossibly fast strides. Rutledge had just enough time to raise his hands defensively, to open his mouth in what might have been a shout or a plea, but not enough time to escape what came next. The sound that followed was described by multiple witnesses as a branch snapping in a heavy storm. That single, awful crack would haunt everyone in that carriage house for the rest of their lives. Colonel Jeremiah Rutledge, master of 3,000 acres and nearly 200 enslaved souls, died instantly, his neck broken with shocking ease. But it wasn't just the killing that horrified the witnesses. It was the effortlessness of it. Samson had ended his master's life with no more strain than a man might use to snap a twig for kindling. For a heartbeat frozen in time, he stood over the fallen body, his massive hands still curved as if holding something fragile that had simply shattered. Then he looked up at the circle of horrified faces, and when he spoke, his voice carried an intelligence and refinement that no one believed a slave could possess. "Gentlemen," he said, in perfect diction and with a faint, unplaceable accent, "I suggest you leave. Now." The panic that followed was instant and absolute. Prominent men, judges, planners, doctors, trampled over one another in blind terror. They clawed for the doors, stumbled into the night, and fled to their carriages without dignity or hesitation. Within minutes, Rutledge Plantation was silent again, except for the slaves in their quarters, the flickering torches, and Samson standing alone among the scattered apparatus of his master's obsession. What happened in the hours that followed remains one of the great mysteries of that terrible night. The house slaves, terrified and unsure, stayed in their cabins until dawn. When they finally emerged, the carriage house was empty. The torches had burned out, and both Samson and Colonel Ruddle's body were gone, vanished, as if neither had ever existed. All that remained were the deep handprints pressed into the oak beams, physical proof of Samson's unnatural strength, and a plantation full of people suddenly left without a master, without direction, and without any idea what would come next. But the disappearance of Samson and the body was only the beginning. Within hours, riders were dispatched to Little Rock. Telegrams were sent, and by sunrise, county officials had begun to arrive at Rutledge Plantation. What they found would launch an investigation that consumed local authorities for months, and left questions that still have no answers today. The immediate aftermath of that Thanksgiving night plunged Pulaski County into chaos. By dawn on November 27th, word had spread to the network of plantation owners, overseers, and county officers who formed the backbone of Arkansas society. The implications were staggering. Not just that a slave had killed his master, but that he had done so with impossible strength and then vanished without a trace, leaving witnesses traumatized beyond reason. Judge Cornelius Dillingham, once one of the state's most respected legal minds, returned to Little Rock in what his clerk described as a state of total nervous collapse. Dr. Nathaniel Petton, the Memphis physician, checked himself into a private sanitarium and refused to speak about the events for over a year. Professor Voss simply disappeared, abandoning his hotel room and leaving behind a single trunk filled with notes written in a bizarre mix of German and mathematical symbols that no one could decipher. At first light, Sheriff Thomas Brieg arrived at Rutledge Plantation with a team of armed deputies and several volunteer militiamen from Little Rock. They expected a crime scene, signs of violence, perhaps the beginnings of a slave revolt, or at least some clue as to where Samson might have fled. Instead, they found something far more disturbing, a plantation where time itself seemed to have stopped. The house slaves, when questioned, gave accounts that were eerily consistent and completely unhelpful. Yes, they had heard shouting from the carriage house around 10:30 that night. No, they hadn't dared to investigate. Slaves learned early not to interfere in their master's business. Yes, they had seen lights moving around the grounds late into the night, but from their cabins, they couldn't tell who was carrying them or where they led. Most frustrating of all, when asked about Samson himself, the witnesses seemed almost unable to describe him clearly. He was tall, they said. He was strong, of course. But when pressed about his habits, his temperament, his relationships, their answers became vague and uncertain, as if they were describing someone they'd only dreamed about. It was as though the memory of the man had already begun to fade. Jupiter, the plantation blacksmith, proved to be the most willing to talk, though what he said only deepened the mystery. Under pressure from Sheriff Brieg, Jupiter admitted that Samson had possessed strength far beyond anything humanly possible. Jupiter claimed Samson's strength was beyond anything a normal man should possess. But when pressed for details, his story took a strange turn. He could work all day without getting tired, Jupiter said, his hands twisting nervously in his lap. But it wasn't normal tired, you understand? It was like he was powered by something different than the rest of us. He paused, eyes darting to the floor before continuing. Sometimes, late at night, I'd see him doing things that didn't make sense. He'd be working with numbers, scratching in the dirt, but they weren't any numbers I'd ever seen before. And sometimes he'd talk to himself, not in English, but in something else. Jupiter hesitated again, clearly struggling to describe what he had witnessed. It sounded like he was giving orders, he finally said, not just talking, commanding, like he was used to being in charge of something or someone. The physical evidence at the plantation only deepened the mystery. The carriage house still showed signs of the previous night's chaos. Scattered weights, bent iron bars, shattered beams, but not a single drop of blood, despite the violent nature of Colonel Ruddle's death. There were no footprints leading away from the scene, even though the ground was soft enough to preserve them. And, most disturbingly, there was no body. Sheriff Brieg organized search parties that swept through the Arkansas bottomlands for miles in every direction. They dragged ponds, scoured abandoned cabins, and followed every creek and river within a 20-mile radius. But Samson had vanished like morning mist, leaving behind no sign that he had ever been there at all. As the days turned into weeks, the investigation grew more frantic. Governor Elias Conway, under immense pressure from the state's powerful plantation owners, offered a $500 reward for any information leading to Samson's capture, an enormous sum that drew bounty hunters from as far away as Memphis and New Orleans. Wanted posters spread across the Arkansas Territory and neighboring states, describing a man so generically it could fit dozens. Large Negro male, approximately 6 feet 4 inches tall, unusually strong build. Answers to the name Samson. Extremely dangerous. Approach with caution. But as the weeks passed, reports began to surface, reports that unsettled even the most hardened searchers. Several bounty hunters swore they had seen something in the Arkansas wilderness, glimpses of an impossibly tall figure moving through the trees at night, campsites left behind by someone of tremendous strength, trees bent or torn from the earth as if by some supernatural force. Even more disturbing were the stories spreading across other plantations. Near Pine Bluff, one landowner complained that the slaves had begun whispering among themselves, their eyes full of dangerous excitement. Near Helena, an overseer abruptly quit, claiming the slaves were talking about a man they called the Strong One, a figure who was coming to set things right. By Christmas of 1857, the Samson affair had become an embarrassment to Arkansas law enforcement. Despite the reward, the federal marshals, and a manhunt that stretched across multiple states, no one was any closer to finding him than they had been on Thanksgiving night. To make matters worse, nor the newspapers had picked up the story. They called him the Arkansas Superman, a slave who had killed his master and vanished into thin air. Fearing political fallout, Governor Conway quietly ordered the record sealed. The reward was rescinded, the wanted posters taken down, and newspapers were told to drop the story. But while the official investigation ended, one final discovery would change everything. When Colonel Ruddle's estate was settled in early 1858, the executors found a hidden compartment in his desk. Inside lay a collection of documents that revealed his interest in Samson had gone far beyond mere scientific curiosity. Among the papers were letters exchanged with several northern universities, discussions about human experimentation and physical enhancement. There were receipts for chemical compounds ordered from laboratories in Boston and New York. Substances whose names meant nothing to the local investigators, but hinted at scientific or medical uses. Most curious of all was a shipping manifest from New Orleans, dated just 2 weeks before Samson's arrival at the plantation. It listed specialized pharmaceutical equipment and associated materials. And then there was the final document, the one that chilled every man who read it. A contract with a Boston company called Meridian Research Associates for ongoing physiological assessment and enhancement protocols. The signatures at the bottom belonged to Colonel Jeremiah Rutledge and someone identified only as Subject S. The handwriting, the house slaves confirmed, belonged to Samson himself. The implications were staggering. Had Samson been part of a secret medical experiment? Was Rutledge collaborating with northern scientists on some kind of human enhancement project? No one in Arkansas was prepared to ask those questions aloud. The response was swift and silent. The documents were sealed under federal custody. Executors were sworn to secrecy. The slaves who had recognized Samson's handwriting were sold off to distant plantations, and all mention of Meridian Research Associates was erased from official records. But the story didn't die. It spread, quietly, through the whispered networks of enslaved people across the South. Stories of a strong man who broke his chains and vanished into legend. Rumors of other plantations, other experiments, and other subjects being prepared for something far greater. What would happen, people whispered, if others like Samson decided they'd had enough too? As 1858 dawned over Arkansas, the Samson case officially ceased to exist. But in the slave quarters of the South, in the private letters of anxious plantation owners, and in the sealed archives of federal offices in Washington, the questions born from that one Thanksgiving night refused to die. And somewhere out in the vast wilderness of the Arkansas Territory, those who claimed to have seen him swore that Samson was still alive, growing stronger, waiting patiently, perhaps planning something that would make the events at Rutledge Plantation seem like only the beginning. Then, in the spring of 1858, new developments emerged, ones that deepened the mystery surrounding Samson's disappearance and cast new light on the true nature of what had happened at Rutledge Plantation. The first sign that the case wasn't truly over came from an unexpected source. The Pinkerton Detective Agency, quietly hired by unknown parties to conduct an independent investigation into Thanksgiving incident. Allen Pinkerton himself arrived in Little Rock that March, accompanied by 2 of his most trusted operatives. Unlike the local authorities, who had focused on chasing Samson's trail after the killing, the Pinkertons turned their attention to what had happened before his arrival at Rutledge Plantation. Their investigation uncovered a trail that led back through Louisiana and Mississippi and eventually north to a series of medical facilities that had been conducting what they called human improvement research. The first breakthrough came from the original bill of sale that had brought Samson to Arkansas. Detective James Hawthorne, posing as a potential slave buyer, traveled to Louisiana to question the man who had sold him, a Frenchman named Boudreaux. What Hawthorne discovered was deeply unsettling. Boudreaux's plantation, located in the bayou country south of New Orleans, had been the site of extensive medical experiments carried out under the name the Southern Health Initiative. The program claimed to study diseases common among enslaved people. In reality, it was testing chemical compounds and medical procedures designed to enhance human physical abilities. The Frenchman was nervous from the moment I mentioned Samson's name. Hawthorne wrote in his confidential report to Pinkerton. He kept insisting that he disclosed all known risks in the bill of sale, that he bore no responsibility for what came after. But under pressure, Boudreaux admitted the truth. Samson had been part of what he called the enhancement protocol for over 2 years before he was sold. According to Boudreaux, The Southern Health Initiative had been secretly funded by a group of Northern investors interested in creating more efficient labor systems. Their experiments involved chemical treatments, strict exercise regimens, and what they described as nutritional optimization protocols. Most subjects showed mild improvements in strength and endurance. A few displayed dramatic changes, but a very small number, among them Samson, began to exhibit abilities that went far beyond the limits of ordinary human capability. And then came the side effects. The enhanced subjects grew different, Boudreau admitted. They became harder to control. They started asking questions about themselves, about the treatments. Some of them began to think in ways they shouldn't have been able to. Samson, he said, was the most extreme case. He learned to read and write in just a few months. He grasped complex mathematical ideas, and soon he began demanding answers about what was being done to him. The Louisiana experiments ended abruptly in 1854, when several enhanced subjects escaped during a violent uprising that left 3 overseers dead. Most of the escapees were hunted down and quietly executed, but a few, including Samson, were sold to distant plantations, each sale wrapped in carefully worded disclaimers about their unusual characteristics. This revelation drove the Pinkertons to dig deeper into the northern connections behind the Southern Health Initiative. What they found was staggering. A network of medical facilities, universities, and private laboratories running similar experiments throughout the 1840s and 1850s. The work was financed by a mixture of private investors, government contracts, and, most ominously, by military interests seeking to create enhanced soldiers for future wars. At the center of this network was Dr. Marcus Kleinman, a German scientist who had established research centers in Boston, Philadelphia, and Baltimore. His life's work focused on what he called human optimization, using chemical, physical, and psychological conditioning to produce individuals with superior abilities. His test subjects came from prisons, immigrant communities, and, increasingly, enslaved men and women purchased specifically for experimentation. One of Pinkerton's most skilled operatives, Detective Sarah Chun, infiltrated Kleinman's Boston laboratory by posing as a nurse seeking employment. Her reports revealed the staggering scope and precision of the enhancement program. The facility maintains detailed records on over 200 subjects, she wrote. The success rate varies dramatically depending on the subject's health, mental state, and what they refer to as genetic compatibility factors. Successful subjects exhibit strength increases ranging from 50% to, in extraordinary cases, over 300% of normal human capability. But her most chilling discovery came from Kleinman's private correspondence. The doctor had been in regular communication with Colonel Jeremiah Rutledge, sending him detailed instructions, progress reports, and recommendations for pushing Samson's development even further. And then came the most damning revelation of all. The Thanksgiving demonstration at Rutledge Plantation had been planned in advance. It wasn't an accident. It was a test. The subject has reached the limits of our current understanding. One of Kleinman's letters read, "Your upcoming demonstration will provide critical data on the psychological breaking point of enhanced subjects. We must know what happens when they are pushed beyond all reasonable limits. The implications for military use are extraordinary." The final piece of the puzzle came from an unexpected witness. Jupiter, the blacksmith who had known Samson best. The plantation blacksmith Jupiter had stayed in contact with several Pinkerton agents through a quiet network of free black operatives in Little Rock. In late April, Jupiter shared information that suggested Samson hadn't simply vanished. He had been preparing for his escape for months. He had been making arrangements. Jupiter revealed during a secret meeting. There were people who knew about him, people who had been waiting for the right time. The night he killed the colonel wasn't random. It was planned, and he didn't do it alone. Others helped him get away. This revelation opened the door to a much broader investigation, one that uncovered the existence of an underground network dedicated to freeing enhanced subjects from their captivity. This organization, calling itself the Freedom Chain, was made up of abolitionists, free blacks, and even a few sympathetic whites. They had learned of the enhancement experiments and viewed them as an atrocity that went far beyond even the horrors of slavery itself. The freedom chain had been quietly operating since the early 1850s, helping enhanced escapees reach safe havens in Canada, Mexico, and even the farthest corners of the American wilderness. They had developed clever ways to erase tracks, forge new identities, and most importantly, help enhanced subjects control their extraordinary abilities, allowing them to blend into normal society without detection. But the most shocking discovery came in May of 1858, when Detective Hawthorne uncovered proof that the freedom chain had been infiltrated by foreign agents. Documents seized during a raid on a suspected safe house in Memphis revealed direct correspondence with British and French intelligence operatives, both eager to learn more about America's secret enhancement programs. The implications are staggering. Pinkerton wrote in his final report to his mysterious clients, "This enhancement program hasn't just created individuals who exceed normal human limits. It's drawn the attention of foreign powers who now see its military potential. If enhanced subjects like Samson have been taken abroad, we could soon face enemies with capabilities we neither understand nor control." By June 1858, the Pinkerton investigation was quietly shut down, its findings classified, and its operatives reassigned to other cases. But the questions it raised refused to fade. In the halls of Washington, military officials and government researchers began whispering about what they'd learned and what it could mean for the future. Meanwhile, strange reports began to surface across Arkansas and beyond. Settlers told stories of an impossibly tall, impossibly strong figure moving through the wilderness. Tales spread of a mysterious benefactor helping escaped slaves reach safety. Native American tribes spoke of a man who could outrun horses and bend iron with his bare hands, yet spoke with intelligence and compassion. Not the savage rage people expected from someone of his power. And in the ruins of what was once Rutledge Plantation, now overgrown and silent, visitors described strange, haunting phenomena. Deep handprints pressed into solid oak beams that seemed to grow clearer with time instead of fading. Patches of earth crushed as if by enormous weight. And on still nights, the faint sound of movement inside the old carriage house, as if some massive presence were testing its strength against invisible restraints. As summer turned to autumn in 1858, 1 year after that fateful Thanksgiving, the mystery of Samson had grown far beyond a local manhunt. The questions were no longer where he had gone, but what he truly was, what had been done to him, and what his freedom might mean for a nation already tearing itself apart over slavery, liberty, and the very definition of what it means to be human. Just when it seemed the horror in Arkansas had reached its peak, it deepened. If this story gave you chills, share with a friend who loves dark mysteries. Hit the like button to support the channel, and don't forget to subscribe, because what happens next is even more terrifying. The autumn of 1858 brought new events that would forever change how the Samson case was understood and feared by those in power. What started as isolated reports of strange happenings soon formed a pattern, one far more organized and dangerous than a single fugitive hiding in the wild. The first major incident took place in October, near the town of Camden in southern Arkansas. At the plantation of Marcus Henley, one of the state's wealthiest cotton producers, witnesses described a night of impossible terror. Henley had recently purchased 3 new slaves from a Louisiana dealer, men whose bills of sale bore the same cryptic markings once used to describe Samson: unusual physical capabilities, possible medical anomaly. On the night of October 15th, these 3 men, identified only as Caesar, Goliath, and Titan, simultaneously broke free from the plantation's most heavily fortified holding facility. But this was no ordinary escape. According to the lone surviving overseer, James Huckabe, they didn't break the locks on their chains. They broke the chains themselves, twisting solid iron apart as if it were soft clay. "I've managed slaves for 20 years, Huckabe testified to investigators. "And I've never seen anything like that night. Those men moved like they could see in the dark, coordinated, silent, like they'd been planning for years instead of days. And the strength, God help me, the strength was inhuman. The three enhanced men destroyed every restraint on the plantation, not just their own bonds, but every chain, every lock, every bar of iron meant confine another human being. They did it all without a sound, without waking the other slaves, and without alerting the guards, until they were ready to leave. When they finally departed, they took more than their freedom. They carried with them detailed maps of the region and enough supplies to suggest a far greater journey. Something planned and deliberate, not just another desperate bid for escape. The Camden incident was only the beginning. Within weeks, new reports began pouring in from plantations all across the South. In Mississippi, 2 enhanced subjects escaped from a research facility near Natchez, leaving behind a scene of surreal destruction. Equipment twisted into grotesque sculptures of bent metal and splintered wood. In Louisiana, 4 enhanced individuals broke free from what was supposed to be an escape-proof containment site. But before they fled, they systematically destroyed every record, every note, every document connected to the enhancement program. The pattern was undeniable and terrifying. These weren't random escapes. They were coordinated, guided by some unseen hand that knew exactly where these people were being held and exactly how to free them. Even worse, the escapees seemed to possess inside knowledge of the program itself. They targeted specific research sites and destroyed key evidence with surgical precision, as if following a larger strategy. Then, in November, Dr. Marcus Kleinman, the German scientist who had helped design the enhancement protocols, arrived in Little Rock to consult with federal officials about the growing crisis. His report was grim and filled with panic. "We are dealing with subjects who have been fundamentally altered," Kleinman warned in a classified military briefing. "Not only physically, but intellectually." The process meant to enhance their strength and endurance had gone far beyond its intended scope. It had changed them. "These subjects," Kleinman continued, "are demonstrating coordination, advanced reasoning, and long-term planning, signs of strategic intelligence we never anticipated." But his most disturbing revelation wasn't about their bodies. It was about their minds. Kleinman's research suggested that the chemical and physical treatments used to enhance them had also broken down mental barriers that normally limit human potential. The enhanced showed astonishing memory, faster learning, and, most alarming of all, evidence of a shared consciousness, a kind of collective awareness that allowed them to coordinate across great distances without communication. "We may have created a new form of human being," Kleinman admitted in his report, "one that sees ordinary humans not as equals, but as inferior." He warned that the implications for control, order, and society itself were catastrophic. Meanwhile, the hunt for Samson had taken on new urgency. Authorities were beginning to suspect that he wasn't just another escapee, but possibly the mastermind behind the coordination of these enhanced individuals. Reports spread throughout the Arkansas Territory, sightings of a towering man, impossibly strong, seen lurking near plantations and research sites just days before mass escapes occurred. Witnesses said it was as if he were conducting reconnaissance, studying defenses, planning operations. Then came the testimony of Thomas Bogard, a bounty hunter who had been tracking enhanced subjects since the Camden Uprising. He claimed to have encountered Samson himself. In late November, while following tracks near the Buffalo River in northern Arkansas, Bogard said he came face to face with a fugitive in a narrow canyon at dusk. He was standing on a ledge about 30 feet above me, Bogard told federal marshals, and I knew instantly this wasn't someone I could take alive. He had to be close to 7 feet tall, built like he could tear a tree out of the ground. But it wasn't his size that scared me, it was his eyes. He looked at me like he was calculating whether killing me was worth his time. According to Bogard, Samson spoke to him, calmly, fluently, in perfect English, with the tone of an educated man. He told me I was hunting the wrong prey, Bogard recalled. He said men like him weren't the problem. We were. That people had been treated like property, like animals to be used and discarded, and that it was going to change, whether we wanted it to or not. Then, without another word, Samson stepped backward off the ledge. When Bogard climbed up moments later, there was nothing, no footprints. No trail, only two deep handprints pressed into the rock, proof that what he'd seen was real. By December 1858, the crisis had grown so severe that President James Buchanan himself was receiving regular intelligence briefings. Washington officials began calling it the Samson crisis. The implications went far beyond national security. They touched on human experimentation, states' rights, and the very foundations of freedom and slavery, issues already threatening to tear the country apart. Military strategists rushed to develop enhanced subject containment plans, but their work was crippled by a horrifying realization. No one actually knew how many enhanced individuals existed, where they were, or what they were truly capable of. For years, the programs had operated in secrecy, with no centralized oversight and almost no documentation. General Winfield Scott, in a classified memo to the War Department, wrote, "We may be facing a threat of our own creation, one we are completely unprepared to confront. These subjects possess superior physical power and tactical intelligence that makes them nearly impossible to track or contain. If they are being led by a single authority, possibly the Samson, then what we're facing is not rebellion, but an insurgency of superhuman beings." And then came the final blow. On New Year's Eve, 1858, at a secret military research facility hidden deep in the Cumberland Mountains of eastern Tennessee, a facility so classified that even the president was unaware of its existence, something unimaginable occurred. That night, as a snowstorm raged outside, the compound was attacked. Survivors described a coordinated assault by enhanced individuals, led by a figure matching Samson's description. The attack wasn't some chaotic outburst. It was a perfectly executed military operation, planned with precision, reconnaissance, and tactical brilliance. They knew exactly where everything was, reported Major William Crittenden, the facility's commanding officer. They disabled our communications first, then moved systematically, destroying every research file, freeing every subject. The entire operation took less than 2 hours, and they did it without killing a single person, though they made it unmistakably clear that if they had wanted to, no one would have survived. The most haunting part of the Tennessee raid wasn't the destruction itself, but the message they left behind. Carved into the wall of the main laboratory, letters 2 inches deep, were words that would torment government officials for years to come. The chains are broken. The strong shall no longer serve the weak. A new age begins. It was signed only with a symbol, a pair of broken shackles. Investigators would later discover that same mark at every site where enhanced subjects had escaped or been freed. What began as scattered incidents of escape was now clearly something else, an organized, coordinated movement, a rebellion led by beings whose capabilities went far beyond anything humanity had ever seen. As 1859 dawned over a nation already divided between slavery and freedom, the Samson crisis emerged as a threat unlike any before. These enhanced subjects weren't just fighting for their own freedom. They were dismantling the entire system that had created them. Somewhere deep within the American frontier, Samson and his growing army of enhanced followers were preparing their next move. This was no longer a series of escapes. It was the opening phase of a war, one that would challenge everything Americans believed about human nature, human rights, and the price of turning people into property to be bought, sold, and altered at will. The full scope of the Samson conspiracy finally began to surface in the spring of 1859, in the last place anyone expected, the nation's capital itself. What started as a simple investigation into government contracting irregularities would soon explode into a political and moral crisis that reached the highest levels of power, threatening to expose secrets men had killed to keep buried. The spark came when Congressman Joshua Giddings of Ohio, a staunch opponent of slavery, received an anonymous package. Inside were hundreds of pages, letters, medical reports, financial ledgers, and classified correspondence, all exposing the true extent of the government's enhancement program. The documents revealed a vast network of human experimentation stretching from the bayous of Louisiana to the laboratories of Boston, funded through a tangled web of military budgets, private investors, and government contracts. But the most shocking revelation was a roster of enhanced subjects created over nearly a decade. It contained over 300 names, their locations, their enhancement levels, and, most chilling of all, their current status: captured, escaped, or terminated. At the very top of that list, marked with special notation for both highest enhancement level and active resistance leader, was one name, the name that had come to define the entire crisis: Samson. Realizing the magnitude of what he held, Congressman Giddings demanded immediate congressional hearings into what he called the systematic enslavement and torture of human beings in the name of scientific progress. His call was met with furious opposition from Southern representatives, who argued that such an inquiry violated states' rights and interfered with legitimate agricultural research. But Giddings found powerful allies among Northern lawmakers, equally horrified by the revelations, and by April 1859, a special committee was formed to investigate. The first public hearing, held on April 21st in the Capitol building, drew massive crowds and intense press coverage. Dr. Marcus Kleinman, subpoenaed to testify about his role, delivered testimony that left even hardened observers in shock. The enhancement protocol, he said, his thick German accent trembling with emotion, was originally a humanitarian effort. We believed that by increasing the physical capabilities of the enslaved, we could reduce their suffering, make their labor less punishing. We never intended to create what we ultimately did. Under relentless questioning, Kleinman exposed the dark evolution of the program. What began as medical research into endurance and health had grown into full-scale human modification, pushing subjects to physical and mental extremes no ethical scientist could justify. The subject known as Samson, Kleinman admitted, was both the program's greatest success and its gravest mistake. His strength was measured at roughly 4 times that of a normal human. His intelligence surpassed every expectation, and his psychological profile showed a level of independence and leadership that made him utterly impossible to control. But the most devastating admission came when Kleinman revealed the program had expanded beyond enslaved subjects to prisoners, immigrants, and even soldiers, none of whom fully understood what they were agreeing to. The Enhancement Project, once justified as research on already oppressed population, had mutated into a vast system of human experimentation, violating every known principle of ethics and human rights. The next day, the committee turned its attention to the military. In a closed session, General Winfield Scott testified that since 1852, the War Department had been secretly funding enhancement research with one goal in mind: creating soldiers who could operate in extreme conditions and perform missions far beyond normal human limits. The enhanced subjects showed immense potential, General Scott testified. They were ideal for covert operations, reconnaissance, and high-risk combat, where superior endurance and strength could mean the difference between victory and failure. But the promise quickly turned to disaster. The psychological changes that came with enhancement made these individuals almost impossible to control. They became resistant to command, prone to independent thought, and increasingly sympathetic to causes that clashed with military interests, Scott admitted. The Army's attempt to create its own enhanced soldiers ended catastrophically. Volunteers deserted in record numbers, many taking classified intelligence with them. Several were court-martialed for disobeying orders, and at least 2 were executed for outright mutiny. By 1857, the military quietly shut down the project, but not before unleashing dozens of enhanced soldiers whose current whereabouts remain unknown. The congressional hearings reached their dramatic peak on April 25th, when the committee revealed it had received an official message from Samson himself, delivered through secret intermediaries. The statement was read into the congressional record and printed in newspapers across the country. To the representatives of the American people, the message began, "I write to you not as a former slave, not as a fugitive, but as a free man, one who has broken the chains that bound not just my body, but my mind and spirit." For too long, Samson wrote, men like me have been treated as property, bought and sold like livestock, bred and modified like animals, used as subjects for experiments that no moral nation should ever allow. The statement described his capture, his time in the enhancement program, and the moment he realized the true horror of what was being done to him and countless others. But its most powerful passages weren't about pain. They were about revelation. Through this process, Samson wrote, we have gained not just physical strength but clarity. We have seen the true nature of this nation's institutions, how easily men are turned into property when profit demands it. We have learned how science is twisted to justify oppression. And we have seen that America's so-called principles of liberty and equality are applied not by conscience, but by convenience, determined by who holds power and who does not. The statement ended with a declaration that shook the Capitol to its core. We, the enhanced subjects who have broken free, do not seek revenge. We seek justice. We demand the immediate termination of all human enhancement programs. We demand the freedom of every subject still held captive, and we demand recognition as free human beings with rights equal to any other American. If these demands are not met, we will take whatever actions are necessary to secure our freedom and the freedom of those still in chains. The message was signed not only by Samson, but by over 50 other enhanced subjects. It was, in effect, a declaration of independence, issued by beings powerful enough to enforce it. Southern representatives reacted with outrage, calling for the enhanced to be hunted down at any cost. Northern lawmakers, many aligned with abolitionists, saw the letter as both terrifying and just a moral reckoning the nation could no longer avoid. The Samson crisis deepened the divide between North and South, pushing America even closer to the edge of civil war. Under mounting pressure, President James Buchanan authorized a massive nationwide manhunt. Federal troops were deployed to scour the wilderness for enhanced fugitives. Bounties were raised at unprecedented sums, and a special task force was established to locate and capture or eliminate what officials now called enhanced insurgents. But even as the crackdown began, reports flooded in that the enhanced were no longer hiding. They were moving, organizing, and appearing in places no one expected. Sightings came from major cities: Washington, Philadelphia, New York, Charleston, where enhanced individuals were observed conducting reconnaissance, gathering intelligence on government buildings, armories, and research sites. The crisis reached its peak on May 15, 1859, when Samson himself appeared in Washington, D.C. He didn't sneak into the city. He walked through it, openly in broad daylight. Witnesses described him as towering and broad-shouldered, moving with calm, deliberate confidence. There was no fear in him, only purpose. His destination, the Capitol building. His intent, to speak directly to the Congressional Committee investigating the program. The request for an audience was, of course, denied. Samson was legally a fugitive slave, wanted for murder, not a political representative. But his very presence in the heart of the nation's power sent a message that no one could ignore. The enhanced were done running. They were ready to confront their creators, face to face. Samson's visit ended without bloodshed, but it left behind a message more powerful than any battle. Before leaving Washington, he carved a final statement into the marble steps of the Capitol itself. The experiment is over. The specimens have become the scientists. By nightfall, Samson had vanished as suddenly as he'd appeared, leaving only the deep gouges in stone that prove his inhuman strength and a chilling realization. The enhanced were no longer humanity's victims. They were becoming its reckoning. The enhanced subjects were now agents of their own destiny, possessing the power to challenge anyone who stood in their way. The Samson crisis had reached its ultimate stage, a direct confrontation between the enhanced and the government that had created them. Yet, the resolution did not come through violence or bloodshed. Instead, it emerged from a series of secret negotiations that would reshape American policy on human experimentation and establish precedents that influenced government research for generations. Negotiations began in June 1859, conducted entirely through intermediaries, hidden from public view. Even as the nation edged toward civil war, a breakthrough came when President James Buchanan, Realizing a military solution would result in catastrophic casualties and scandal, authorized Secretary of War John Floyd to communicate directly with Samson and his representatives. The talks were delicate. Intermediaries included abolitionist leaders quietly supporting the enhanced subjects and federal officials who understood that force alone would fail. Samson's demands were precise, sophisticated, and legally grounded. He sought justice, not revenge. He proposed a solution that addressed the immediate crisis and set principles to prevent future abuses. The resulting agreement, later known as the Washington Compact, though no public record ever confirmed it, included immediate cessation of all federally operated human enhancement research, destruction of all related records and research materials, provision of new identities and financial support for enhanced subjects who wish to integrate into society, creation of a separate territory in remote Alaska, then Russian territory, for those who prefer to live apart from normal society. International diplomacy played a role. Russian officials, eager to establish goodwill before the eventual sale of Alaska to the United States, agreed to facilitate the creation of these communities. Dr. Marcus Kleinman, whose congressional testimony had exposed the program, provided crucial medical data. In exchange for immunity, he helped design treatments allowing some enhanced subjects to reduce their abilities and live normal lives. Enhanced subjects were given real choices: integrate or separate. Those who chose integration received new identities, support, and medical treatments to moderate their powers. Those who chose separation were safely relocated to Alaska. Samson himself chose separation, but ensured that all others had genuine options. His final communication with federal negotiators, delivered in August 1859, reflected the intelligence and moral clarity that had made him an exceptional leader. I have no desire to live among those who see individuals like me as property or weapons, nor do I wish unnecessary suffering on anyone. The compact we have negotiated respects autonomy while preventing future tragedies. I hope future generations will learn from these mistakes and treat all human beings with the dignity they deserve. The public resolution was carefully managed. Congress quietly concluded its investigation, acknowledging irregularities without detailing the enhancement experiments. Kleinman and other key figures were reassigned to remote locations to continue research without access to human subjects. Enhanced subjects who integrated into society scattered across northern states, living quiet lives under assumed identities. Many became farmers, craftsmen, or small business owners, subtly using their abilities to succeed. Some aided the Underground Railroad, secretly helping others escape to freedom. Those who separated founded legendary communities in Alaska, known to the indigenous populations for their strength, wisdom, and commitment to justice. These settlements remain connected with each other and certain government officials, a living reminder of the consequences of human experimentation. The most enduring legacy of the Samson crisis was its effect on federal policy. The Washington Compact established the first formal ethical guidelines for government medical research, laying the foundation for informed consent and human subjects protection. Though initially secret, these principles shaped government research for decades. And while the Civil War, beginning less than 2 years later, overshadowed the enhancement program in public memory, the impact of the Samson crisis remained, a testament to courage, intelligence, and the unyielding demand for justice. The social upheaval of the Civil War soon made the story of a few dozen enhanced individuals seem minor by comparison. Official records of the program were classified, eventually forgotten, and buried in archives that would remain sealed for over a century. Yet the legacy of Samson and the enhanced subjects extended far beyond their immediate crisis. The communities they established in Alaska became centers of learning and innovation, pioneering advances in engineering, medicine, and agriculture that eventually benefited the entire territory. Those who chose integration became influential figures in the abolitionist movement, using their abilities and unique perspective to fight against the system of slavery that had once exploited them. Most importantly, The Samson crisis demonstrated that human dignity and individual rights could triumph over even the most sophisticated systems of oppression. The enhanced subjects had not only escaped their bondage, they had fundamentally challenged the assumptions that made such bondage possible in the first place. As the decades passed and the enhancement program faded from official memory, the story of Samson transformed into legend. Yet in certain circles, among researchers studying ethics and government science, civil rights advocates fighting medical exploitation, and indigenous communities in Alaska, the memory of the enhanced subjects endured. They were a reminder of both humanity's capacity for cruelty and its potential for redemption. Even the handprints Samson left in the oak beams of Rutledge Plantation's carriage house remained visible for decades, a silent testament to the night when one man's refusal to accept degradation sparked a crisis that changed American history. Visitors often felt a sense of awe upon seeing the marks, not fear, but recognition of the extraordinary courage it took to break chains both physical and societal. This story reminds us that the greatest horrors in human history often arise not from the supernatural, but from the willingness of ordinary people to treat others as less than human when it suits their interests. Yet it also shows that the desire for freedom and human dignity is a force stronger than any enhancement, any system of oppression, and any attempt to reduce people's property. So what do you think? Was everything revealed, or are there still secrets buried deep within government archives? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Tell us what you think really happened to Samson and the other enhanced subjects. If you enjoyed this tale of hidden history and human resilience, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share this story with someone who loves uncovering the forgotten truths of America's past. There are more hidden chapters waiting to be explored, and we'll be here to guide you through them. See you in the next video, where another mystery that the powerful will prefer to keep buried will be revealed.